There are three philosophical quotes from Wittgenstein, Aristotle, and Kafka that don't just sound profound, but can completely change the way that you speak. First, we have Wittgenstein, who says, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." Now, the immediate takeaway from here is that it's not just about using big words. Instead, it's about using a unique and nuanced vocabulary that describes the world and its variations. Concurrently, in your own life, you can personify the world, for example, which commands respect through creativity and poetic expression through metaphor, because we often view the world through the lens of a story. So let's synthesize this down into a real life situation. Imagine you're in a tough interview and you get asked the famous question about what your strengths are. And you know what it is that you're good at, but you're finding it difficult to really articulate how effective that they can be in the workplace. Expanding your language by using precise terms, therein expanding your world by calling upon memorable experiences, allows you to express yourself much more clearly. This opens up possibilities that vagueness would otherwise close off. For example, instead of saying, "I feel like I have good time management skills," you could instead say, "Time management skills have enabled me to identify micro and macro objectives at the start of every week, therefore completing more in less time. Coworkers often referred to me as the cup of coffee that got their day going." This highlights the power of language. By refining your words, choosing them more carefully, and shaping the meaning of such words, you can expand the boundaries of your thought and communication, and hopefully make you a much more memorable job candidate. You see, Wittgenstein believed that language was the key to understanding reality. Earlier in his career, also known as early Wittgenstein, he believed that words can picture the world precisely. Then later in his career, he argued that the meaning of such words comes from the actual use of them, how they function in the world socially. Nonetheless, we often see and think of ourselves and the world through the format of our language. Language and understanding are inseparable. Don't you finally want to know and explain why you're the right person for that job? Well, then stop saying the same thing that everyone else is saying and employ the words that extract emotion and meaning out of the world. For the next quote we have, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it," by Aristotle. This encourages a particular form of openness within speech. It improves dialogue because it inadvertently gets you into the habit of actually listening to others, which is something that many people don't actually often do. It does this by allowing you to engage with ideas that you don't necessarily agree with. This, in turn, makes the conversation so much more civil, thoughtful, and even persuasive. The vital keys here are that you don't need to identify with an idea or define it, or even the person speaking it, as either good or bad, because absolutes are dangerous. They restrict curiosity, connection, and demonstrate very irrational behavior. And Aristotle himself emphasized reason and virtue and the golden mean, believing that humans flourish best through a balance of action and rational thought. For him, knowledge wasn't just abstract, but it was also very practical, guiding how we live and speak through wisdom. As an example that demonstrates how you can exhibit this quote in the modern day, imagine that you come across an acquaintance that shares a political belief that you strongly disagree with. Instead of shutting down, you listen and explore their reasoning. And here's the thing, without even needing to adopt it. This by far makes you a better conversationalist and earns respect even in disagreements. You can examine, even if but for a moment, think about where their thoughts are derived from. Maybe if you had the same beliefs as they did, you would also think the same things. But this is why you don't have to identify it or automatically shape it as good or evil. Think about it this way. The more that you have to convince someone else to think like you do, the more insecure you probably are about your own beliefs. And who knows, you might actually learn something in the process. Isn't that the purpose of dialogue in the first place? And thirdly, we come to our dear friend Kafka, who takes a slightly alternative approach that's not as structured, not as precise, but can be applied in very different situations, such as when you're communicating and expressing with loved ones. He says, "Don't bend, don't water it down, don't try to make it logical, don't edit your own soul according to the fashion. Rather, follow your most intense obsessions mercilessly." This is a call for uncompromising honesty and originality. It urges the speaker not to dilute their voice, but to speak in a way that carries the weight of their truest convictions. You see, what do you think happens when you unapologetically map out your true emotion to the extent of its enthusiasm? Well, superficially, others will want to be like you with your courage and your confidence, but with more depth, you will encourage others to unravel the expressions that they've been holding down in the chambers of their heart. Though not much of a systematic philosopher, Kafka's work unveils a worldview of existential alienation, absurdism, and the individual's struggle against incomprehensible systems. This urges authenticity even in the face of meaninglessness. So let's say you're preparing for a speech or a presentation, and everyone around you is suggesting to make it safer, more conventional. They feel like the more traditional and the more fabricated that it is, the easier it will be to finish. But the kicker to that is that you'll actually be much more tense because it's not actually you, and much of our communication is nonverbal anyways. Moreover, it's likely that it'll be quite forgettable too. As contemporary dancer Martha Graham famously wrote to her best friend Agnes, "Keep the channel open. If you close it, it will not exist through any other medium." I highly recommend you read the full letter, by the way. It's truly beautiful. In other words, the passion that comes through you while speaking will exude a confidence and an addicting enthusiasm that others cannot help but imitate. Most of us speak every single day, but how often do we stop to ask, what power does my speech really carry? What doors is it opening and which ones is it closing? Our words can make us seem shallow, but they can also make us unforgettable. For centuries, some of the greatest thinkers wrestled with the question, how should we speak and why does it matter? For more conversations like these, please subscribe and remember to be human.